Tonight, we explore a Zen teaching that points toward a particular kind of freedom. It is called no mind, or in Japanese, Mushin. This does not mean a mind that is blank or dull. It is a way of being where life flows without struggle. Zen Buddhism teaches that this flowing way of being is available to us far more often than we realize. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. We spend so much of our lives caught in thought. The thinking mind works constantly, believing it must figure everything out, control every outcome, prepare for every possibility. And in all this effort, we grow tired. We lose touch with the simpler way of being. Zen Buddhism offers another possibility. Not the absence of mind, but a mind that does not cling. When the thinking mind relaxes its grip, something else emerges. A kind of peace and natural wisdom that knows how to meet each moment without struggle. The masters who discovered this truth left us stories and teachings that point the way. As we move through these teachings tonight, allow your breath to find its own rhythm. Let your body settle wherever it is resting. There is nothing you need to figure out. Nothing you need to hold on to. The stories will unfold on their own, carrying you deeper into rest with each one. Simply listen and let these ancient stories carry you toward that quiet place where the mind can finally rest. Let's begin our journey together. There is a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical labor. It comes from thinking too much, from a mind that will not stop commenting on everything, judging, planning, worrying, running through endless possibilities that may never arrive. Most of us know this exhaustion well. We lie down at night and our bodies are ready for sleep, but our minds keep spinning. We finish a task, and instead of resting, our thoughts race ahead to the next thing. We sit in a quiet room and find ourselves in an argument with someone who is not even there. The thinking mind believes it is helping us. It believes that by going over everything again and again, it will solve our problems. It will protect us from making mistakes. It will prepare us for what is coming. But often, it simply exhausts us. It keeps us company we did not ask for. It fills the silence with noise that serves no purpose. Zen does not ask us to stop thinking. Thoughts are natural. They arise on their own, like clouds forming in an empty sky. The teaching of no mind points to something different. It shows us what becomes possible when we stop following every thought. When we stop believing that we must think our way through every moment. When the thinking mind is allowed to rest. What happens when the constant commentary falls silent? Not through force or suppression, but simply because we stop feeding it with our attention, a space appears. And in that space, we discover a different way of being present. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. In a busy trading town, there lived a merchant named Sajin who had built a successful business over many years. He was clever with numbers. He could assess the value of goods at a glance. He knew which traders were honest and which ones would cheat him if given the chance. His mind was always working, calculating, planning his next move. But Sajin had a problem that all his cleverness could not solve. He could not sleep. Each night he would lie on his mat and close his eyes, but his mind would not stop. It reviewed the day's transactions. It worried about shipments that might be delayed. It rehearsed conversations he needed to have with difficult suppliers. It calculated and recalculated figures he had already checked 3 times. Even when his body was heavy with fatigue, his thoughts kept spinning. He tried drinking warm sake before bed. He tried herbal remedies from a local healer. He tried exhausting himself with long walks. Nothing worked. His mind simply would not rest. The sleeplessness began to affect his work. He made small errors he would never have made before. His temper grew short. He snapped at his assistants over minor mistakes. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His wife worried about his health. One morning, unable to sleep yet again, Sajin rose before dawn and walked through the quiet streets. He found himself near the old temple at the edge of town. The gates were open, so he wandered in, hoping the peaceful grounds might calm his racing thoughts. The temple was simple. Wooden buildings arranged around a stone courtyard. Old pine trees casting long shadows in the early light. The smell of incense drifting from somewhere inside. As Sajin walked through the courtyard, he noticed an old man sweeping fallen leaves. The man moved slowly, methodically, guiding leaves into small piles with a bamboo broom. Back and forth, back and forth. The soft scratching sound of the broom against stone was the only noise in the early morning stillness. Sajin watched for a while. There was something about the old man's movements that caught his attention. The sweeper seemed completely at ease. His face held no tension. His shoulders were relaxed. He moved as though sweeping was the only thing in the world, and he was perfectly content for it to be so. After some time, the old man looked up and noticed Sajin watching. He smiled and continued his work. Sajin approached him. "Forgive me for staring," he said. "I could not help but notice how peaceful you seem. I am a merchant in this town. My business does well, but my mind gives me no rest. Even now, when I should be sleeping, I am walking these grounds because my thoughts will not stop. You seem to have found something I cannot find. What is your secret?" The old sweeper leaned on his broom and considered the question. "I have no secret," he said simply. "I just sweep." "Just sweep?" Sajin felt frustrated. "But surely your mind must be doing something. You must be thinking about something while you work." The old man shook his head gently. "When I sweep, I sweep. The broom moves. The leaves gather. My feet shift on the stones. There is the sound of bristles against rock. The smell of morning air. Why would I need to add thinking to this? The sweeping does itself. I am just here with it." Sajin frowned. "But don't you think about your problems? Your worries? Things you need to do later?" "Problems come when they come," the old man said. "If a problem arrives, I will meet it then. Right now, there is only sweeping. If I fill this moment with thoughts about other moments, I miss the only moment that actually exists." He smiled. "Besides, thinking about problems does not solve them. It just makes this moment heavy with things that are not here." Sajin stood there for a long time, watching the old man return to his work. The broom moved back and forth. Leaves gathered into piles. The scratching sound continued, gentle and rhythmic. something stirred in Sajin. He realized he had never done anything the way this old man swept. He was always somewhere else in his thoughts. While eating, he planned his afternoon. While talking with customers, he calculated profits. While lying in bed, he reviewed the entire day and anticipated the next one. He was never simply here doing what he was doing. "May I try?" Sajin asked suddenly. The old man handed him the broom without a word. Sajin began to sweep. At first, his mind continued its usual chatter. He thought about how foolish he must look, a successful merchant sweeping a temple courtyard at dawn. He thought about the deals he needed to make that day. He thought about whether this was a waste of time. But the old man stood nearby, watching. "You are not sweeping," he said gently. "You are thinking about sweeping. Feel the broom in your hands. Feel your feet on the ground. Listen to the sound. Just this. Nothing else." Sajin tried again. He felt the smooth bamboo handle against his palms. He noticed the weight of the broom as it moved. He heard the soft scratching of bristles. He felt the cool morning air on his face. For a few moments, his mind fell quiet. There was just the sweeping, the movement, the sound, the leaves gathering. And in those moments, Sajin felt something he had not felt in years. A simple peace. Not the peace of having solved all his problems, but the peace of not carrying them for a moment. The thoughts returned, of course. They always do. But now Sajin had glimpsed something. He had tasted a moment without the constant commentary. He understood, if only briefly, what the old man meant. He returned the broom and thanked the old man. "I think I understand a little," he said. "But how do you maintain this? How do you keep your mind from taking over?" The old sweeper laughed softly. "I don't maintain anything. I don't fight my thoughts. When they come, they come. When they go, they go. I just keep sweeping. The thoughts are not the problem. Believing I must follow every thought, believing I must solve everything with thinking, that is what creates the tiredness you describe." He picked up his broom and resumed his work. "Your mind is not your enemy. It is just very busy. You have trained it to be busy. You can also let it rest. Not by forcing it, but by giving your attention to what is actually here. The mind follows attention. Put your attention in this moment, in this task, in these sensations, and the thinking mind has nothing to do. It can finally rest." Sajin walked home as the sun rose over the town. That night, before lying down, he did not try to force his thoughts to stop. Instead, he felt the mat beneath him. He noticed the weight of the blanket. He listened to the sounds of the night. When thoughts arose, he did not fight them. He simply returned his attention to what was actually present. Sleep came more easily than it had in months. In the days that followed, Sajin did not become a different person. He was still a merchant. He still calculated and planned and made deals. But something had shifted. He began to notice when his mind was spinning uselessly. He learned to bring his attention back to what was actually in front of him. Not by fighting his thoughts, but by giving his presence to whatever task was at hand. he never forgot the old sweeper. And sometimes, when his mind grew especially busy, he would remember the sound of that bamboo broom against the temple stones. The simplicity of it, the peace of just sweeping, and his thoughts would quiet, even if only for a moment. This story shows us something important about the teaching of no mind. The old sweeper did not have fewer thoughts than Sajin. He was not smarter or more disciplined. He had simply discovered a different way of being with his mind. Zen teaches us that thoughts themselves are not the problem. They arise naturally, like ripples on water. The exhaustion comes from our habit of following every thought, believing every thought, feeling that we must engage with every thought that appears. This constant engagement is what tires us. The thinking mind believes it is essential. It believes that without its constant activity, things would fall apart. It believes it must figure everything out, prepare for every possibility, solve every problem in advance. But most of this activity accomplishes nothing. It simply churns and churns, wearing us out. What the old sweeper discovered was that attention is the key. Where we place our attention shapes our entire experience. When attention goes to the spinning thoughts, we spin with them. When attention comes to rest in what is actually present, the body, the breath, the simple task at hand, the thinking mind has less to grip onto. It can relax. This is not suppression. We do not push thoughts away or try to make the mind blank. We simply stop feeding the thoughts with our attention. We come back to what is here, the feel of the broom, the weight of the blanket, the sensation of breathing. This coming back is the practice. Not achieving perfect stillness, but returning again and again to this moment. Buddhism shows us that we have more choice than we realize. We have been trained to follow our thoughts automatically, as though we have no option. But we can learn to let thoughts pass without following them. We can learn to rest in simple presence. This is the beginning of no mind. Not the absence of thoughts, but freedom from being controlled by them. The tired mind is not a broken mind. It is simply a mind that has been overworked, that has forgotten how to rest. The teaching of no mind shows us that rest is always available. Not later, when we have solved all our problems, but now, in this very moment, by simply being where we are. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this truth. In the same town where Sajin worked as a merchant, there lived a young scribe named Fumio. He worked in a government office, copying official documents by hand. His brush must form each character perfectly. There was no room for error. A mistake could change the meaning of a contract or a legal decree. Fumio took his work seriously. He had trained for years to develop his calligraphy. His teachers had praised his natural talent. When he first began working at the office, his characters flowed onto the paper with grace and precision. But something had changed. Over the past several months, Fumio had begun to struggle. His hand would cramp in the middle of copying a document. His brushstrokes, once smooth and confident, now trembled slightly. He would hesitate before making a stroke, second-guessing himself. The more he tried to focus, the worse it became. He examined his brush. There was nothing wrong with it. He checked his ink. It was the same quality he had always used. He adjusted his posture, his grip, the angle of his paper. Nothing helped. The problem, though Fumio did not recognize it, was in his mind. He had begun to watch himself too closely. Each time he raised his brush, a voice in his head would comment, "Make sure this stroke is straight. Do not press too hard. Remember the last mistake you made. Everyone is counting on you. If you fail, you will lose your position." This constant commentary created tension. His hand tightened. His shoulder hunched. His breath grew shallow. He was no longer writing. He was thinking about writing, worrying about writing, criticizing his writing, all while trying to write. The natural flow he once had was buried under layers of mental noise. One afternoon, Fumio was called to the archive room to retrieve some old documents. It was a dusty space in the back of the building where records from decades past were stored. Fumio rarely went there. As he searched through the shelves, he noticed an old man sitting at a small desk in the corner. The man was copying something, his brush moving steadily across the paper. Fumio had never seen him before. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, but his hand moved with a smoothness that made Fumio stop and stare. The old man's brush seemed to dance. There was no hesitation, no tension. The characters appeared on the paper as if by themselves. Fumio watched for several minutes, forgetting what he had come to find. When the old man finally set down his brush, he looked up and noticed Fumio. "You are the young scribe who works in the front office," he said. "I have seen your work. You have good training. But something is troubling you." Fumio was surprised. "How did you know?" "Your characters have begun to show strain. I can see the tension in them. I remember this problem. I had it myself many years ago." Fumio felt a wave of relief at being understood. "I do not know what has happened," he confessed. "I used to write easily. Now every stroke is a struggle. My hand cramps. I hesitate. I make mistakes I never would have made before. I have tried everything." The old man nodded slowly. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a cushion across from his desk. "Show me how you write." Fumio sat down and picked up a brush. He dipped it in ink and prepared to write a simple character on a blank sheet. Immediately, the familiar tightness appeared. His shoulder tensed. His breath caught. The voice started. "Do not mess this up. The old man is watching. Write it perfectly." He made the first stroke. It was uneven. The old man watched without expression. "Put down the brush," he said gently. Fumio set it down, feeling ashamed. "I want you to close your eyes," the old man said. "Now, feel your hand. Just your hand. Notice any tension in it." Fumio closed his eyes and focused on his hand. It was tight, almost clenched. He had not noticed. "Now, feel your arm. Your shoulder, your breath." Fumio noticed tension throughout his body. His shoulders were raised. His breathing was shallow. He was holding himself like someone preparing to fight. "This is your problem," the old man said. You are not writing with your body. You are fighting with your mind. Your hand knows how to form these characters. You trained it for years, but you do not trust it anymore. You think you must control every tiny movement with your thoughts. This creates the tension. The tension ruins the stroke. Fumio opened his eyes. But how can I write well if I do not pay attention to what I am doing? There are two kinds of attention, the old man explained. One is the thinking mind trying to control everything. This is what you have been doing. It watches and judges and interferes. The other kind of attention is simply being present. Aware, but not controlling. Open, but not grasping. This is the attention that allows the brush to move freely. He picked up his own brush and held it lightly. Watch. I am not thinking about how to form the character. I have written it 10,000 times. My hand knows what to do. I simply let the hand move while I stay present without interfering. He made a single stroke. It was perfect. The thinking mind wants to help, he continued. But sometimes the greatest help is to step aside. Your hand learned calligraphy. Trust it. Your job now is not to control, but to allow. Be present without thinking. See what happens. Fumio picked up his brush again. This time, he did not try to control the stroke. He felt the brush in his fingers. He noticed the paper waiting. He let his hand begin to move without the voice commenting, without the mind directing each tiny movement. The character that appeared was different. Not his best work, but something had shifted. There was less tension in the lines. More flow. Better, the old man said. You stepped aside for a moment. The brush could move more freely. This is what you must practice. Not controlling, but allowing. Not thinking about writing, but simply writing. The hand knows the way. The mind just needs to stop blocking it. Over the following weeks, Fumio returned to the archive room whenever he could. The old man, whose name was Shoda, had worked in that back room for 40 years, copying ancient documents that needed to be preserved. He had discovered through decades of practice what Fumio was only beginning to understand. When I was young like you, Shoda told him once, I also thought that thinking harder would make me write better. I analyzed every stroke. I criticized every mistake. I tried to improve through mental effort. And the harder I tried, the worse I became. It took many years to learn that the mind is not always our friend at the brush. Sometimes the kindest thing the mind can do is simply rest. Gradually, Fumio's calligraphy began to return to what it once was. And then it became something more. There was a new quality in his work, a naturalness that had not been there even in his best early days. His characters flowed as if they had always been on the paper, waiting to be revealed. His hand no longer cramped. His shoulder no longer tensed. He wrote for hours without fatigue, because he was no longer fighting himself. The thinking mind still arose, of course. It still offered its commentary, but Fumio had learned not to follow it. He would acknowledge it and return to the simple act of letting the brush move. Years later, when young scribes asked Fumio how he achieved such beautiful work, he would remember old Shoda and smile. I learned to get out of my own way, he would say. The brush knows what to do. The hand knows what to do. My job is just to be here, present and allowing, without my thoughts getting in between. This story reveals another dimension of the tired mind. Fumio's problem was not that he lacked skill. His hand knew exactly how to form each character. The problem was interference. His thinking mind, wanting to help, actually created the tension that ruined his work. Zen teaches us that the body holds wisdom. The thinking mind cannot direct. When we learn a skill deeply, it becomes part of us. The knowledge lives in our hands, our muscles, our bones. This embodied wisdom does not need the thinking mind to supervise it. In fact, such supervision often makes things worse. Consider how a child learns to walk. At first, everything is conscious effort. But once walking is learned, we do not think about it. We simply walk. Imagine if we tried to consciously control every tiny muscle involved in walking. We would stumble and fall. The skill works because we have released it from thinking mind control. The teaching of no mind points to this natural flow. When the thinking mind steps aside, what remains is not blankness or incompetence. What remains is a deeper intelligence that knows how to respond. The hands know how to write. The body knows how to move. Something in us knows how to meet each moment when we stop interfering with too much thought. This does not mean we never think. Thinking has its place. We plan, we analyze, we solve problems. But we do not need to think constantly. We do not need to fill every moment with mental commentary. When thinking is needed, we think. When it is not needed, we can let it rest. This balance is what no mind points toward. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from grasping. We can grasp with our hands, holding too tightly to things that come and go. But we can also grasp with our minds, holding too tightly to thoughts, to the need to figure everything out, to the belief that constant thinking will keep us safe. This mental grasping exhausts us. Releasing it brings rest. Both Sajin the merchant and Fumio the scribe discovered the same truth from different angles. The mind that will not stop creates tiredness, tension, struggle. The mind that can rest when rest is appropriate allows natural wisdom to emerge. We do not lose anything by letting the thinking mind quiet down. We gain access to a deeper part of ourselves that has always been there, waiting for the noise to settle. As you rest here now, you might notice your own thinking mind. How busy it has been. How hard it works. How much it believes it must control. There is no need to judge it or fight it. Simply notice. And perhaps for just a moment, you can let it rest. Not forever. Not even for very long. Just for this breath. Just for this moment. Letting the thoughts be there without following them. Letting your attention settle into the simple fact of being here. This is the beginning of no mind. Not an achievement to reach, but a releasing that is always available. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air entering your body and feel it leaving. There is nothing you need to figure out. Nothing you need to hold. Simply rest here, allowing the breath to breathe itself, allowing this moment to be exactly as it is. We place great trust in our thinking minds. We believe that if we can understand something with our thoughts, we truly know it. We analyze, we reason, we figure things out. This is how we were taught to learn. This is how we believe knowledge works. But there is another kind of knowing that lives deeper than thought. It lives in our hands, in our bodies, in the quiet intelligence that does not need words. Watch a grandmother kneading bread dough. She does not think about how much pressure to apply or when the texture is right. Her hands simply know. This knowing came from years of practice, but it no longer requires thinking. It has become part of her. We all carry this kind of knowledge. The way your feet find the stairs in the dark, the way your hands catch something before you realize it is falling. The way your body knows how to balance, how to breathe, how to heal a wound while you sleep. None of this requires the thinking mind. It happens beneath thought, guided by a wisdom we rarely acknowledge. The teaching of no mind invites us to recognize this deeper intelligence. Not to replace thinking, but to understand that thinking is not the only way we know things. When we trust what the body has learned, when we allow the hands to do what they know how to do, something flows more easily. The thinking mind can rest because it is not needed for everything. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. In a river town known for its beautiful fabrics, there lived a silk dyer named Yuma. Her family had been dyeing silk for 5 generations. The craft had been passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter, each one learning the subtle art of coaxing color into cloth. Yuma had begun learning as a small child. Before she could read or write, she knew the smell of a dye vat ready for use. She would sit beside her mother in the workshop, watching the silk lowered into the steaming vats. The air was thick with earthy scents. Wooden paddles hung from the walls. Bolts of undyed silk waited in neat stacks, pale as morning clouds. She learned to recognize the different plants and minerals that created different colors. Indigo for deep blue, gathered from leaves that had to be fermented for months before they would yield their color. Safflower for red, its petals dried and processed through a dozen careful steps. Gardenia for yellow, boiled until the water turned gold. Each substance had its own temperament, its own requirements, its own secrets. Her mother would guide her small hands, showing her how to feel the silk, how to sense when the fabric had absorbed enough color. "Do not think too much," her mother would say. "Let your hands learn. They are smarter than your head for this work." At first, Yuma did not understand. She tried to memorize rules. She tried to count the seconds the silk stayed submerged. She watched for visible signs that she could name and repeat. But her colors were inconsistent. Sometimes too pale. Sometimes too dark. Sometimes the dye did not hold at all. Then, somewhere in her 10th year of practice, something shifted. She stopped trying so hard to understand. She simply did the work, day after day, and gradually her hands began to know things her mind had never grasped. By the time Yuma was grown, she had become the finest dyer in the region. Merchants traveled from distant cities to buy her silk. Her colors were richer, more lasting, more alive than anyone else could achieve. When people asked her secret, she found it difficult to explain. The truth was, Yuma did not think about dying anymore. When she worked, her hands moved on their own. She would lower the silk into the vat, and something in her would know exactly when to lift it out. Not from counting, not from watching the color. Something deeper than that. A feeling in her fingers, a sense in her body, a knowing that had no words. One autumn, a scholar named Tadashi came to the town. He was writing a book about traditional crafts and wanted to document Yuma's dyeing techniques. He arrived at her workshop with paper and ink, ready to record every detail of her process. Yuma welcomed him politely and agreed to let him observe. She was preparing a batch of indigo dye that morning, one of the most difficult colors to work with. Indigo is temperamental. The dye vat must be kept at exactly the right condition. The silk must be dipped and lifted at precise intervals. Too long in the vat and the color becomes muddy. Too short and it will not hold. Tadashi watched intently as Yuma prepared the vat. He asked questions constantly. How hot should the water be? How much indigo per measure of water? How do you know when the vat is ready? Yuma tried to answer, but she found his questions difficult. She had never measured the water temperature with an instrument. She simply put her hand near the surface and felt whether it was right. She had never weighed the indigo. She added it until the vat looked correct, until it smelled correct, until something in her said it was enough. But how do you know? Tadashi pressed. There must be some method, some rule you follow. Yuma considered this. When I was young, my mother taught me. She would guide my hands and show me what to feel for. At first, I did not understand. I could not feel what she felt. But after many years, my hands learned. Now they know things I cannot explain with words. Tadashi frowned and wrote something in his notebook. He seemed dissatisfied with this answer. Yuma lifted a piece of silk and lowered it into the indigo vat. She held it beneath the surface, her eyes half closed, her attention somewhere inside her hands. After a time that seemed random to Tadashi, she lifted the cloth out. It emerged looking greenish and dull. It does not look blue, Tadashi observed. Wait, Yuma said. As the silk met the air, something remarkable happened. The greenish color began to shift. Slowly, like dawn breaking, the fabric transformed into the most beautiful deep blue Tadashi had ever seen. It was the color of a summer night sky just after sunset. How did you know when to lift it? He asked, amazed. Yuma smiled. I felt it was ready. But what did you feel? Yuma was quiet for a moment. I do not know how to say it. There is a moment when the silk has taken what it needs. The weight changes slightly. The way it moves in the liquid shifts. Something tells my hands it is time. But if I try to think about it, if I try to watch for the signs deliberately, I miss them. I can only feel them when I am not trying to feel them. Tadashi spent 3 days at Yuma's workshop. He filled many pages with notes about temperatures and timing and proportions. He recorded everything he could observe. When he left, he believed he understood her technique well enough to teach others. A year later, Yuma heard that Tadashi had published his book. A chapter was devoted to indigo dyeing, filled with precise measurements and detailed instructions. She also heard that several people had tried to follow his instructions and failed. Their colors were acceptable but not remarkable. They could not achieve what Yuma achieved, despite following every step exactly as written. One of these failed dyers eventually traveled to see Yuma. He was frustrated and confused. "I followed the instructions perfectly," he said. "I measured everything. I timed everything. But my indigo is flat and dull compared to yours. What am I doing wrong?" Yuma invited him to watch her work. As she prepared a new batch, she let him observe closely. When it came time to dip the silk, she paused. "Put your hand near the vat," she said. "What do you feel?" He put his hand out. "It is warm." "What else?" He concentrated. "I do not know." "Just warmth." "There is more," Yuma said gently. "The vat has a presence, a readiness. When it is right, you can feel it welcoming the cloth. But this feeling cannot be measured or written down. It can only be learned by doing, by failing, by trying again. My mother stood beside me for 10 years before my hands understood. The scholar's book captured the outside of the technique, but the heart of it lives in the hands, and hands must learn for themselves. The dyer stayed with Yuma for several months. At first, he kept trying to think his way to success. He would calculate and analyze and reason. He made notes about everything. He tried to find patterns in what Yuma did, rules he could write down and follow. His results remained mediocre. "You are still in your head," Yuma told him one morning. "I can see it in how you move. Stiff, deliberate. You are thinking about every action instead of letting the action happen." "But how do I stop thinking?" he asked, frustrated. "I cannot simply turn off my mind." "You do not need to turn it off," Yuma replied. "Just stop asking it to do what it cannot do. Your mind cannot feel the dye. Your mind cannot sense when the silk is ready. Only your hands can do that. Let your mind rest while your hands learn." He did not understand at first, but he had no other options, so he kept working. Day after day, standing beside the vats, lowering silk, lifting silk, failing and trying again. But slowly, as the weeks passed, something began to shift. He stopped trying so hard to understand with his mind. He simply did the work, day after day, letting his hands learn what his thoughts could not grasp. He paid attention not to ideas about dyeing, but to the actual sensations. The weight of wet silk, the smell of the vat at different temperatures, the subtle changes in color that happened so gradually they seemed invisible, until suddenly they were complete. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the silk felt different when it had absorbed enough dye. The way the liquid in the vat had a particular shimmer when the conditions were right. These were not things he could explain or write down. They were things his hands were beginning to know. One morning, he lifted a piece of silk from the indigo and knew, without knowing how he knew, that it was perfect. The color that emerged was not as fine as Yuma's, not yet. But it was alive in a way his earlier work had never been. "There," Yuma said, smiling. "Your hands are beginning to remember." He looked at her with new understanding. The book could never teach this, could it? Books teach the thinking mind, Yuma replied. But some knowledge lives below thought. It must be given directly, hand to hand, through practice and patience. The thinking mind can point the way, but the hands must walk the path themselves. This story shows us something essential about the wisdom that lives in our bodies. Yuma could not explain her skill in words because words belong to the thinking mind, and her skill had moved beyond thinking. It had become part of her hands, her senses, her whole being. Zen teaches us that this kind of knowing is not inferior to intellectual understanding. In many ways, it is deeper. When something is truly learned, it no longer requires thought. It becomes natural, effortless, immediate. The thinking mind can step aside because it is no longer needed. We see this in many areas of life. The musician whose fingers find the right notes without conscious direction. The cook who knows by smell and sound when the food is ready. The mother who senses what her child needs before any words are spoken. All of these involve a knowing that cannot be captured in explanations or instructions. The teaching of No Mind honors this deeper intelligence. It reminds us that we are more than our thoughts. We are bodies that have learned countless things. We are hands that remember. We are beings with access to wisdom that thinking can never reach. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this truth. Along a wide river that was difficult to cross, there lived a ferryman named Tomo. He had been born blind. He had never seen the river he crossed every day, never seen the passengers who rode in his boat, never seen the far shore he aimed for with each journey. His mother had wept when he was born and did not open his eyes. His father had wondered what would become of a blind son. But Tomo's grandfather, himself an old ferryman, had taken the child under his protection. "The river does not care whether you can see it," he had said. "It only cares whether you can feel it." From early childhood, Tomo had learned the river through his hands and ears. His grandfather would take him out on the boat and describe nothing of what he saw. Instead, he would place Tomo's hands on the pole and say, "Feel that? The current is pushing us toward the sandbar. Adjust." He would fall silent during a crossing and then ask, "Where are we now? What is the water telling you?" At first, Tomo could feel nothing but confusion. The pole was just a pole. The water was just water. But his grandfather was patient. Year after year, they crossed together. And slowly, the river began to speak to Tomo in a language that had no words. By the time his grandfather passed away, Tomo knew every inch of that river. Not through sight, which he had never possessed, but through a knowing that lived in his whole body. And yet Tomo was the most trusted ferryman on the river. This puzzled many travelers. The river was dangerous. Strong currents ran beneath the surface. Sandbars shifted with the seasons. Rocks lurked in unexpected places. Other ferrymen, men with good eyesight who had worked the river for years, sometimes ran aground or lost their way in fog. But Tomo never did. One day, a young ferryman named Genji came to learn from Tomo. Genji had been working a different stretch of the river and had grown frustrated. Despite his sharp eyes and careful attention, He struggled in difficult conditions. When mist rose from the water or storms darkened the sky, he became uncertain and made mistakes. He had heard about the blind ferryman who never erred, and he did not believe it. He came to see for himself. Tomo welcomed him aboard for a crossing. The day was clear, the water calm. Genji watched as Tomo untied the boat and pushed off from the shore. The blind man's movements were confident and unhurried. He positioned himself at the pole and began to guide the boat into the current. Genji watched carefully, trying to understand what Tomo was doing differently. The old man seemed to be listening, his head tilted slightly. His hands on the pole were light, sensitive. He made small adjustments constantly, responding to things Genji could not detect. "How do you know where to steer?" Genji asked. "I listen," Tomo said. "The river is always speaking. The sound of the current tells me where the deep water runs. The echo from the shore tells me how far I have traveled. The way the boat moves beneath my feet tells me about the currents that are pushing us." Genji listened but heard only the general sound of water. "I hear the river, but it all sounds the same to me." Tomo smiled. "When you rely on your eyes, your ears grow lazy. You look at the water and think you know what it is doing. But water hides much beneath its surface. I cannot be fooled by how things look. I can only know how things are." They reached the middle of the river where the current was strongest. Genji felt the boat being pushed sideways. He would have fought against it, struggling to hold a straight course. But Tomo did something different. He let the current take the boat, adjusting his angle so that the river's push actually helped them move toward their destination. "You work with the river," Genji observed. "I have no choice," Tomo replied. "I cannot see it, so I cannot oppose it. I can only feel what it is doing and respond. The river is much stronger than me. If I fight it, I lose. If I feel its movement and adjust to it, we both get what we need." As they approached the far shore, a light mist began to rise from the water. Genji felt a familiar anxiety. In mist, he lost his bearings easily. Landmarks disappeared. Distance became impossible to judge. He had run aground in such conditions more than once. But Tomo showed no concern. He continued his steady work with the pole, making adjustments Genji could not understand. When they touched the far bank exactly where they had aimed, Genji was astonished. "How did you find the landing in this mist?" "I cannot see it even now." "I felt it," Tomo said simply. "The way the water moves changes near the shore. The sound changes too. And there is a smell when we are close. Wet earth. The plants that grow at the water's edge. I have crossed this river 10,000 times. My body knows the way." Over the following weeks, Genji returned many times to learn from Tomo. The old man did not lecture or explain in great detail. Instead, he had Genji close his eyes while crossing. At first, Genji felt helpless and frightened without his sight. He had no idea where they were or what was happening. His hands gripped the pole too tightly. His body was rigid with tension. "You are fighting," Tomo told him. "You are trying to see with your mind what you cannot see with your eyes. Stop trying." Just feel. This was harder than any instruction Genji had ever received. His whole life, he had solved problems by thinking harder. Now he was being asked to think less, to trust something he did not even know he possessed. The first few crossings with closed eyes were terrible. Genji felt lost and helpless. More than once he wanted to open his eyes and give up this strange training. But something kept him returning. Perhaps it was the memory of Tomo navigating the mist with such calm certainty. Perhaps it was a growing awareness that his own way had limits. But Tomo guided him patiently. Feel the current through the pole. It is speaking to your hands. Feel how the boat tips and sways. It is telling you about the water beneath us. Listen. The shore sounds different from the open water. The deep channel sounds different from the shallows. Day after day, Genji practiced with his eyes closed. Slowly, impossibly, he began to sense things he had never noticed with his eyes open. The language of the river revealed itself in vibrations through the pole, in the movement of the boat, in sounds he had always heard but never truly listened to. He learned that the current changed its voice depending on depth. Shallow water had a different texture, a different sound when the pole touched bottom. He learned that approaching the shore created subtle echoes he had never consciously noticed. He learned that even the wind on his face told him something about where he was on the river. One afternoon, a sudden storm caught them in the middle of a crossing. The sky went dark. Rain pounded the water. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Genji would have panicked in such conditions before. But now, with all he had learned, he found himself becoming calm. He could not see, so he stopped trying to see. He felt the boat. He felt the current. He listened to the rain hitting the water around them. And somehow, from all these sensations, he knew which way to go. They reached the shore safely. Genji opened his eyes as the rain began to ease. His hands were trembling, but not from fear. From something else. From amazement at what his body had known how to do. I could not see anything, he said to Tomo. But I knew where we were. I knew what to do. How is this possible? Your eyes are useful, Tomo said gently. But they have made you forget your other senses. They have made you think that seeing is the only way of knowing. Now you are beginning to remember what your body always knew. The knowing that does not need sight. The wisdom that comes through the hands, the ears, the skin, the whole being. Genji returned to his own stretch of river, a different ferryman. He still used his eyes. He was not blind, and sight remained helpful. But he no longer relied on vision alone. He felt the river now. He listened to it. He sensed things beneath the surface that his eyes could not show him. And in difficult conditions, when mist or darkness took his sight away, he no longer became helpless. He simply shifted his attention to the knowing that lived in his body, the knowing that did not depend on seeing. The river still spoke to him, even when he could not see it. His hands still remembered the way. This story deepens our understanding of the wisdom that lives beyond thought. Tomo's blindness was not a limitation in the way others assumed. It had forced him to develop a different kind of knowing. And this knowing was in some ways more reliable than sight alone. The Buddha taught that we cling to our usual ways of perceiving. We believe that how we typically see things is how things truly are. But our habitual perceptions are limited. They show us some aspects of reality while hiding others. When we release our grip on these familiar ways, other kinds of knowing become available. Genji discovered that his eyes, for all their usefulness, had actually been limiting him. He trusted them so completely that his other senses had grown dull. When he learned to close his eyes and feel the river directly, a whole world of information opened to him. This is what the teaching of no mind points toward. Not the rejection of our usual capacities, but the recognition that they are not the only capacities we have. The thinking mind is valuable, but it is not the only kind of intelligence we possess. The body knows things. The senses know things. Something deeper than thought knows how to respond when we stop interfering. When we trust this deeper knowing, when we stop believing that we must think our way through every moment, a natural flow becomes possible. Actions arise without strain. Responses come without hesitation. Life moves through us more easily because we are no longer blocking it with excessive mental effort. Take a gentle breath now. Feel your body resting where it is. Notice the quiet intelligence that keeps your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your blood flowing. None of this requires your thinking mind. It happens on its own, guided by a wisdom deeper than thought. Rest in that wisdom now, allowing it to hold you. In Zen, there is a teaching about forgetting the self. This does not mean losing our memory or becoming confused about who we are. It points to something more subtle. There is a part of us that watches everything we do. It comments. It judges. It worries about how we appear to others. This watcher creates a kind of split inside us. One part acts, another part observes and evaluates the action. Zen shows us that when this watcher dissolves, even for a moment, something remarkable happens. Action becomes whole. We are no longer divided against ourselves. The Buddha spoke often about the burden of self-concern, how we suffer because we are constantly protecting and promoting this sense of I. We worry about how the I looks to others. We fear that the I will fail or be embarrassed. We compare our I to other people and feel either superior or inadequate. All of this mental activity creates tension and separation. It pulls us out of direct experience and into a story about ourselves having the experience. Buddhist practice invites us to investigate this self that seems so solid. When we look closely, we find it is more like a process than a thing. Thoughts arising and passing. Sensations coming and going. A constant flow that we have mistaken for something fixed. When we stop clinging to this constructed self, when we forget to maintain it even for a moment, we discover a freedom that was always available. This forgetting is not something we force. We cannot try hard to forget ourselves. That very trying comes from the self that wants to achieve something. Instead, forgetting happens naturally when we become fully absorbed in what we are doing. The musician lost in the music. The gardener lost in the garden. The child lost in play. In these moments, the watcher disappears because attention has become complete. There is just the activity, happening by itself. This is what Zen calls no mind in action. Not the absence of awareness, but awareness without a watcher standing apart. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. In a mountain village known for its musical traditions, there lived a young man named Kira who played the bamboo flute. He had studied since childhood, and his teacher often praised his natural gift. When Kira played alone, in the forest or by the stream near his home, the music that came from his flute was beautiful beyond words. It seemed to arise from somewhere deeper than technique. Birds would stop their own songs to listen. The wind itself seemed to pause. But Kira had a problem that caused him great suffering. Whenever other people were present, his playing changed. His fingers, so fluid and sure when he was alone, became stiff and hesitant. His breath, so natural and full in solitude, grew shallow and tight. The music that had flowed so freely would stumble and falter. It was not that he played badly in front of others. His technique remained correct. The notes were accurate. But something essential was missing. The aliveness that filled his solitary playing disappeared completely. What remained was competent but empty, like a flower made of paper instead of one that had grown from the earth. Kira tried everything he could think of to overcome this difficulty. He practiced more hours each day, rising before dawn to play until his fingers ached. He performed for small groups of friends and family, hoping to grow accustomed to being watched. He stood before mirrors and played to his own reflection, trying to become comfortable with being seen. He told himself firmly that there was nothing to fear, that the listeners wanted him to succeed, that he had played perfectly 1,000 times alone and could do so again. None of it helped. The moment he became aware of listeners, something clenched inside him, and the music died. It was as if two different musicians lived inside the same body. One who could play with effortless beauty, and one who could barely remember how to hold the flute. The suffering this caused him was considerable. Music was his life. It was what he had been born to do. To have this gift and be unable to share it felt like a kind of prison. He grew withdrawn. He avoided gatherings where he might be asked to play. He began to wonder if he should give up music entirely and find some other way to live. His teacher, an old man named Master Endo, watched this struggle with patient eyes. He had seen similar difficulties in other students over his many years of teaching. He knew that the problem was not in Kira's fingers or his breath or his technique. The problem was in his mind. One autumn afternoon, Master Endo invited Kira to walk with him into the mountains. They climbed for several hours, following a narrow path through the forest. The old man said little, and Kira was too troubled by his own thoughts to make conversation. Finally, they reached a small clearing beside a waterfall. The water fell from a great height, crashing onto rocks below and filling the air with mist and sound. Master Endo sat down on a fallen log and gestured for Kira to sit beside him. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the waterfall. Then Master Endo said, "Play something." Kira hesitated. His teacher was watching. The familiar tightness began to gather in his chest. But he took out his flute and raised it to his lips. The first notes were stiff, as he had expected. He could feel himself watching himself, judging each sound, worrying about what his teacher was thinking. The music came out thin and lifeless. But then something unexpected happened. The sound of the waterfall was so loud that Kira could barely hear his own playing. The roar of falling water swallowed the notes almost as soon as they left his flute. He found that he could not monitor his playing in the usual way. He could not hear well enough to judge himself. With his self-criticism drowned out by the waterfall, something released in him. His fingers began to move more freely. His breath deepened. He stopped thinking about how he sounded and simply played. The music that emerged was unlike anything he had produced in front of another person. It was alive. It flowed. It seemed to come from the same place as the falling water, natural and unstoppable. When he finally lowered the flute, Kira realized he had forgotten his teacher was there. He had forgotten he was performing. He had forgotten himself entirely. There had been just the playing, without a player standing apart from it. Master Endo smiled. "There," he said. "That is the music I hear when you play alone. That is what disappears when you watch yourself too closely." Kira was trembling slightly. "But how do I find that again? The waterfall will not always be there to hide my playing from myself." "The waterfall is just a trick," his teacher replied. "It helped you forget yourself by drowning out your self-judgment. But you do not need a waterfall. You need to understand what happened. When you stopped listening to yourself, you could finally play. When you forgot to watch and judge, the music came freely. The watcher in your mind, the one who criticizes and worries and compares, he is what blocks the flow." Master Endo picked up a small stone and tossed it into the pool below the waterfall. It disappeared into the churning water without a trace. You have two people inside you when you play for others. One plays the flute. The other watches the one who plays and makes comments. Good note. Bad note. They are listening. What do they think of me? Am I making mistakes? This second one, the watcher, creates all the problems. When you play alone, he is quiet because there is no one to impress or fear. When others are present, he becomes very loud. The music cannot flow because you are divided. Part of you plays, part of you watches and judges. The playing becomes self-conscious. It loses its naturalness. Kira understood. He had felt this division, but never seen it so clearly. How do I quiet the watcher? You cannot fight him directly. If you try to stop him, you are just adding another layer of watching. Watching yourself. Watching yourself. This makes things worse, not better. Master Endo smiled gently. Instead, you must give all your attention to the music itself. Not to how you are playing, but to the music. Listen to it as if you were in the audience. Let yourself be absorbed by the sound, the feeling, the life of each note. When attention becomes complete, there is no attention left over for watching. The watcher starves because you are feeding him nothing. They sat by the waterfall until the sun began to set. Then they walked back down the mountain in the fading light. In the weeks that followed, Kira practiced what his teacher had shown him. It was not easy. The habit of self-watching was deeply ingrained. Many times he would begin to play and immediately feel the watcher arising, commenting, judging. But he kept bringing his attention back to the music itself. not to how he was producing it, but to what was being produced. Listening as a listener would listen. Slowly, gradually, something shifted. There were moments when the watcher faded and the music flowed freely, even with others present. These moments came more often as he practiced. He learned to recognize when he was dividing himself and how to let that division heal. One winter evening, Kira was invited to play at a gathering in the village. Many people came to listen, including Master Endo. Kira felt the old fear arise as he looked out at all the watching faces. The watcher in his mind began its familiar commentary. They are all looking at you. Do not make mistakes. What will they think? But then Kira did something he had learned by the waterfall. He let his attention drop fully into the music. He stopped listening to the watcher and started listening to the notes. The first phrase flowed from his flute, and he let himself be absorbed by it, as if he were hearing it for the first time, as if someone else were playing. The watcher tried to arise several times during the performance. But each time, Kira gently returned his attention to the sound itself. And each time, the division healed and the music flowed. When he finished, the room was silent. Then people began to speak all at once, their voices full of something Kira had never heard in response to his playing before. They were moved. The music had touched them. Later, Master Endo found him standing alone outside, looking up at the winter stars. "Tonight you forgot yourself," the old teacher said. The music played itself. "You were not in the way." Kira nodded. He felt different somehow. Lighter. "I think I understand now. When I stop watching myself, the self is not a problem. It was never my playing that was blocked. It was my attention to my playing. When I attend to the music instead of to myself making music, everything flows." This is the teaching, Master Endo said. In music, in life, in everything. The self that watches and worries creates separation. When we forget this self, even for a moment, we become whole. The flute plays the flute. The music makes itself. We are not doing it. We are just here, allowing it to happen. This story shows us what Zen means by forgetting the self. Kira did not become a different person. He did not lose his memory or his identity. He simply stopped standing apart from his own experience, watching and judging. When he forgot to maintain that separation, when his attention became fully absorbed in the music rather than in himself making music, the natural flow returned. We can recognize this experience in our own lives. Those moments when we were so engaged in something that we lost track of time. When we looked up and hours had passed without our noticing. In those moments, the watcher was absent. We were simply doing what we were doing completely. Let us explore another story that reveals this teaching from a different angle. In a region known for its ancient temples, there lived a stonecutter named Hiro who carved statues for the temple grounds. He had learned his craft from his father, who had learned from his father before him. For 3 generations, their family had shaped stone into images of the Buddha, of bodhisattvas, of protective guardians. Hiro was skilled at his work. He knew how to read the stone, how to find the lines of strength and weakness hidden within each block. His technique was sound, his tools well maintained, his knowledge of the traditional forms complete. The statues he produced were correct in every proportion and detail. But something was missing. Hiro felt it, though he could not name it. When he looked at his finished work, it seemed somehow empty. The forms were right, but they did not live. They looked like statues. They did not look like beings captured in stone. Customers were satisfied. Temples accepted his work and paid him well. Other stone cutters respected his skill. By all outward measures, he was successful. But Hiro knew the truth. His statues were shells. Beautiful shells, perhaps, but empty of whatever made the old masterworks so powerful. He had seen work by the old masters that was different. Statues carved centuries ago that still seemed alive. Faces that held genuine compassion. Hands that seemed about to move. There was a Buddha at the temple in the next valley that had been carved 400 years ago. Hiro had traveled there many times just to sit before it. That stone face radiated something his work never achieved. Peace. Presence. A sense that the Buddha was not represented by the stone, but actually lived within it. Something in those ancient carvings transcended mere craft. Hiro did not know how to achieve it, though he tried for many years. He studied the old techniques. He examined the ancient works closely, looking for secrets in the chisel marks. He prayed for guidance. Nothing changed. His work remained technically excellent and spiritually dead. His father had died when Hiro was young, too soon to pass on whatever secret might have made the difference. Hiro had learned the techniques, the proportions, the proper way to hold the chisel. But perhaps there was something else, something his father had not had time to teach. One spring, Hiro received a commission to carve a large Buddha for a new temple hall. It was an important commission, the kind of work that could establish his reputation or expose his limitations. He chose his stone carefully, a beautiful block of granite with subtle grey-blue coloring. He prepared his tools. He made his plans. Then he began to carve. The work proceeded as it always did. Competent but lifeless. Hiro grew frustrated. He could see in his mind what the statue should be. He could see the serenity, the presence, the compassion that should shine from the Buddha's face. But his hands could not produce it. The features emerged correctly formed but somehow dead. Then, in the middle of the project, Hiro received terrible news. His old teacher, Master Genshin, the man who had guided his training after his father's death, had fallen ill and was dying. Hiro left his work immediately and traveled to his teacher's bedside. He arrived just in time. Master Genshin was weak, his breath labored, but his eyes were clear. Hiro sat beside him through the night, holding his hand, saying little. There was nothing to say. They had already said everything important over the years of working together. Now, there was just presence. Being there together as the hours passed. Near dawn, Master Genshin spoke for the last time. "You carve well," he whispered. "But you try too hard. You are in the way of the stone." Before Hiro could ask what he meant, his teacher was gone. Hiro returned to his workshop in a state of deep grief. The unfinished Buddha stood there waiting, the face still emerging from the granite. But Hiro could not work. He sat in his workshop and wept. He walked through the forests and felt the absence of his teacher in every beautiful thing he saw. He could not eat. He could not sleep properly. He was lost in sorrow. The workshop that had always felt like home now felt hollow. His tools lay where he had left them. Dust settled on the unfinished stone. Hiro would sometimes enter the workshop and stand before the Buddha, chisel in hand, but he could not make himself work. The stone seemed to mock him. It waited for hands that had lost their will to shape it. Days passed, then weeks. The temple officials sent messages asking about the progress of their Buddha. Hiro could not respond. The grief had swallowed him. He thought often about his teacher's last words. "You try too hard. You are in the way of the stone." What did it mean? Hiro had always believed that trying hard was the path to excellence. That watching his work carefully would help him improve. That being in control was necessary for creating something beautiful. Had his teacher seen something different? Some flaw in his approach that had been invisible to Hiro himself? One morning, without any decision to do so, Hiro found himself standing before the unfinished statue. A chisel was in his hand. He did not remember picking it up. He did not remember walking to the workshop. The grief was so heavy that it had become a kind of fog, and he moved through it without awareness. He began to carve. He was not thinking about carving. He was not thinking about technique or proportion or how the statue should look. His mind was empty of everything except grief. The loss of his teacher filled him completely. There was no room for anything else. No room for the voice that usually commented on his work. No room for the watcher who evaluated each stroke. Just sorrow and hands that moved. His hands moved. The chisel struck the stone. The sound echoed in the empty workshop. Hours passed. Hiro did not notice. He was not watching himself work. He was not evaluating each stroke. He was simply there, moving, carving, the grief flowing through him and somehow into the stone. Tears ran down his face, and he did not wipe them away. The chisel kept moving. The stone kept yielding. When he finally stopped, the sun was setting. Hiro stepped back and looked at what he had done. The face of the Buddha looked back at him. It was alive. There was no other word for it. The stone face held a presence that none of his previous work had ever achieved. The expression was serene but not empty. Compassionate but not sentimental. The eyes seemed to see him. The lips seemed about to speak. Hiro sank to his knees before his own creation, weeping again, but differently now. He understood something at last. For years, he had been trying to carve great statues. He had been watching his own technique, evaluating every stroke, trying to achieve an effect. This trying, this watching, this constant self-monitoring had created the very emptiness he felt in his work. Today, lost in grief, he had forgotten to try. He had forgotten to watch himself. He had forgotten to be Hiro the stonecutter attempting to create art. There had been just the carving, happening by itself, his hands moving without supervision. This was what his teacher had meant. You are in the way of the stone. When Hiro stood apart, watching and judging and trying, he blocked whatever wanted to flow through him into the work. When he forgot himself, when grief washed away the watcher, his hands could finally do what they had always known how to do. In the months that followed, Hiro completed the Buddha and went on to create many other works. Not all of them achieved what he had achieved on that grief-filled day. The watcher returned often, and with him came the old emptiness. But now Hiro understood what was happening. He knew that his best work came when he forgot to be Hiro, the stonecutter carving stone. When he simply carved. He developed ways to help himself forget. Sometimes he would work in dim light, where he could not see clearly enough to judge. Sometimes he would carve in rhythm with his breathing, letting the breath guide his hands. Sometimes he would simply wait until he felt that strange quiet inside, that absence of the watcher, before beginning. The temple officials who received the completed Buddha were astonished. They had expected good work from Hiro. They had not expected this. The statue became famous in the region. People traveled far to sit before it. They said it brought them peace. They said the Buddha's eyes seemed to see into their hearts. Hiro knew that he had not created that quality through skill or effort. It had come through him on a day when he was too broken to get in the way. The grief had been terrible, but it had also been a gift. It had shown him what was possible when the self that watches and judges falls silent. Years later, a young apprentice asked Hiro how he created such living statues. The old carver thought for a long moment before answering. "I learned to step aside," he said finally. "The stone knows what it wants to become. My hands know how to help it. When I forget to be in the middle, watching and directing, something can happen that I could never make happen through effort. I cannot tell you how to do this. I can only tell you that you are probably already doing it sometimes without knowing. Notice those moments. Notice what is different about them. You will find that you are absent in a certain way. The you that watches and judges and tries. Let that one rest and see what emerges." Zen teaches that we cannot force this forgetting. Any effort to forget ourselves comes from the very self we are trying to forget. But we can create conditions where forgetting becomes more likely. We can notice when we are dividing ourselves and gently return to complete engagement. We can let go of trying to achieve particular results and simply give ourselves to the activity at hand. Both Kira and Hiro discovered this truth through different paths. One learned to give his attention completely to the music. The other was emptied by grief until there was no watcher left. Both found that their best work, their most natural expression, arose when they stepped out of their own way. This is the art of forgetting. Not a loss, but a release. Not emptiness, but wholeness. When the self that watches and judges falls away, what remains is not nothing. What remains is life, flowing naturally, doing what it has always known how to do. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself resting here. Notice if there is a part of you watching yourself rest, commenting on how it is going. And if there is, let that be okay too. Simply notice and return your attention to the breath itself. The simple sensation of air moving. This moment, happening by itself, without anyone needing to manage it. Zen masters have long pointed to water as one of the great teachers of no mind. The Buddha himself used water in many teachings, showing how it reflects the nature of reality and the path to freedom. Water does not struggle. It does not plan its course or worry about obstacles. It simply flows, responding to whatever it meets with a kind of effortless intelligence. When water encounters a rock, it does not stop to consider what to do. It does not become angry at the obstruction or anxious about finding a way around. It simply moves. It flows over, around, or under. It finds the path of least resistance without calculating that path. This is not passivity. Water is enormously powerful. It carves canyons through solid rock. It shapes mountains over time, but its power comes not from force or struggle. It comes from persistence and flexibility, from moving with conditions rather than against them. Zen teaches that the mind can be like water. When thoughts arise, we do not need to fight them or push them away. We can let them flow through like water flowing around stones. When difficulties appear in our lives, we do not need to meet them with rigid resistance. We can respond fluidly, finding the way that opens naturally before us. This is not weakness or giving up. It is a different kind of strength. The strength of yielding. The power of not forcing. The Tao Te Ching, an ancient text that deeply influenced Zen Buddhism, says that nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and rigid. This teaching points to a profound truth. What seems weak is often strong. What seems passive is often powerful. The mind that flows like water accomplishes what the rigid, forcing mind cannot. When we watch water, we see no mind in action, no hesitation, no deliberation, no second guessing, just continuous, appropriate response to whatever is present. This is what becomes possible when we stop overthinking and allow our natural intelligence to guide us. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. High in the mountains, where the air was thin and cold, there lived a young nun named Emmy. She had come to the remote monastery seeking peace. Her mind had always been busy, restless, full of thoughts that spun and tangled like threads in a windstorm. Even as a child, she had lain awake at night while her thoughts raced. Even in the quietest moments, her mind had chattered on, commenting, worrying, planning, remembering. She hoped that the quiet of the mountains and the discipline of monastic life would bring her the stillness she craved. Surely, she thought, if she removed herself from the noisy world, if she devoted herself to meditation and simple living, her mind would finally calm. But the stillness did not come. Even in this peaceful place, surrounded by silence and snow, her mind continued its ceaseless churning. During meditation, thoughts arose in endless streams. One thought led to another, then another, an unbroken chain that pulled her away from her breath, away from the present moment, into memories and fantasies and worries. During work, her mind wandered to concerns about whether she was doing things correctly, whether the other nuns judged her, whether she would ever find what she was seeking. During meals, she barely tasted the food because she was so lost in her thinking. The other nuns seemed calmer. They moved through their days with a quality of ease that Emmy envied deeply. She watched them and wondered what was wrong with her. Why could she not quiet her mind? Why did peace remain so far away despite all her efforts? Perhaps they had some secret they had not shared with her. Perhaps they had been born with quieter minds. Perhaps she was simply defective in some way that could not be fixed. She tried harder. She sat for longer hours in meditation, determined to force her mind into silence. She focused with intense concentration, pushing away each thought that arose. But this only made things worse. The harder she fought her thoughts, the more thoughts came. The more she struggled for peace, the more agitated she became. It was like trying to still water by slapping it with her hands. Each effort created more disturbance. One spring afternoon, when the snow had begun to melt, Emmy walked alone through the forest above the monastery. She felt exhausted and discouraged. Perhaps she was not suited for this path. Perhaps some people were simply born with busy minds and nothing could change that. She came to a place where a mountain stream flowed over rocks and fallen logs. The water was cold and clear, fed by melting snow from higher up. Emmy sat down on a boulder and watched the stream without any particular intention. She was too tired to meditate or practice. She simply sat. The water flowed past her. It did not stop or hesitate. When it met a rock, it parted and flowed around. When it encountered a fallen branch, it slipped over or under, finding its way. There was no struggle in its movement. No effort. Just continuous flowing, moment after moment, adapting to whatever appeared. Emmy watched for a long time. She noticed how the water never fought the obstacles in its path. It did not push against the rocks or try to move them. It simply accepted their presence and found another way. Yet over time she knew this gentle water would wear the rocks smooth. It would carve channels through solid stone. Not through force, but through persistence. Through flowing. A thought arose in her mind, and for once she did not fight it. She let it come. She let it be there. And then, without her pushing it away, it passed. Like a leaf floating on the stream. It appeared, it moved through, it was gone. Another thought came. She watched it the same way. Not grasping. Not resisting. Just watching it appear and watching it pass. The thought did not need her to do anything about it. It flowed through on its own. Something began to shift in Emmy. She had been treating her thoughts like enemies to be defeated. She had been fighting them, pushing them away, trying to dam the stream of her mind. But you cannot stop a stream by building a wall against it. The water just rises and finds another way. And the effort of fighting exhausts you. What if thoughts were like the water itself? What if they were meant to flow? What if her job was not to stop them, but simply to stop interfering with their natural movement? What if peace was not the absence of thoughts, but a different relationship to them? She sat by the stream until the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered peaks with shades of pink and gold. The water kept flowing. It had always been flowing. It would flow long after she was gone. This flow was not a problem to be solved. It was simply how water was. Perhaps her mind was the same. Not broken, just flowing. Then she walked back to the monastery, feeling something different. Not the forced calm she had tried to create. something more natural, more like the stream itself. Her thoughts were still there, but she was no longer at war with them. In the days that followed, Emmy began to practice differently. When she sat in meditation, she did not try to stop her thoughts. She let them come. She let them flow. She watched them arise and watched them pass, like water flowing around stones. When she caught herself fighting, caught herself trying to dam the stream, she would remember the mountain creek. She would soften. She would let the water flow. It was not easy. Years of habit made her want to control, to struggle, to force stillness into existence. But gradually, something changed. The thoughts did not stop coming, but they no longer troubled her in the same way. They were just water flowing, just the natural movement of mind. When she stopped fighting them, they lost their power to disturb her. One evening, the abbess of the monastery asked Emmy how her practice was progressing. "I have stopped trying to empty my mind," Emmy said. "I have learned to let it flow." The abbess smiled. "And what taught you this?" "A stream in the forest. It showed me that water does not fight the rocks in its path. It flows around them. My thoughts are the rocks. For years I have been trying to remove them. Now I am learning to be the water that simply moves on." The abbess nodded slowly. This is an important understanding. Many practitioners spend years fighting their own minds, not realizing that the fight itself is the problem. They believe that if they try hard enough, push hard enough, concentrate fiercely enough, they will finally conquer the mind and achieve stillness. But the mind is not an enemy to be conquered. It is not a wild animal to be tamed through force. She paused and looked out the window at the snow-covered mountains. "The mind is more like water," she continued. "It is meant to flow. Thoughts arise naturally. They are not failures of meditation. They are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are just what minds do, as flowing is what water does. When we stop treating them as obstacles and start letting them flow through us, we find the peace we were seeking all along. Not a dead stillness, but a living peace. A peace that moves and flows and yet remains undisturbed at its depths." Emmy continued her practice at the monastery for many years. Her mind never became perfectly silent. Thoughts continued to arise, as thoughts do. But she had learned to be like water, to flow around what appeared rather than struggling against it, to meet each moment with flexibility rather than rigidity. This was not the peace she had originally imagined, not an empty stillness with no movement at all. It was a different kind of peace, a flowing peace, a peace that included movement rather than fighting against it. When young monastics came to her later, struggling with their busy minds as she had once struggled, she would take them to the stream in the forest. She would not explain anything at first. She would simply have them sit and watch the water. "What do you notice?" she would ask after a while. And usually, if they sat long enough, they would begin to see what she had seen. That water does not fight. That flow is natural. That the peace they sought was not a matter of stopping the stream, but of learning to move with it. This story shows us one face of water mind. Emmy's suffering came not from her thoughts themselves, but from her war against them. When she learned to let them flow, to stop fighting and start allowing, she found the peace that her fighting had made impossible. Zen teaches that resistance creates suffering. When we push against what is, we exhaust ourselves in a battle we cannot win. The thoughts keep coming. The difficulties keep arising. Life keeps presenting us with things we did not choose. If we meet all of this with rigid resistance, we break. But if we learn to flow, to yield, to move with what comes rather than against it, we discover a strength we did not know we had. This does not mean we become passive or that we accept everything without discernment. Water has direction. It moves toward the sea. It has power and purpose. But it accomplishes that purpose through flexibility rather than force, through adaptation rather than rigidity. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a farming valley that depended on careful management of water, there lived a man named Noboru who worked a small plot of land. His fields lay at the edge of the valley where the irrigation was most difficult. Water had to be guided carefully through channels and gates to reach his crops. It was constant work, and Noboru had done it all his life, as his father had before him. But a dry year came. The rains did not fall as they usually did. The river that fed the valley ran lower than anyone could remember. Water that had always been sufficient now became scarce. The farmers in the center of the valley, whose fields were closest to the main channels, continued to receive enough water. But those at the edges, like Noboru, began to see their crops wither. Noboru watched his fields with growing desperation. He had a family to feed, a wife who worked as hard as he did, 2 children who were growing fast and always hungry. Without a harvest, they would face a hungry winter. They might have to borrow from relatives if relatives had anything to spare. They might have to leave the land his family had worked for generations. He began to work frantically, trying to force more water to his land. He dug his channels deeper, cutting into the hard earth until his hands blistered and bled. He built higher walls to capture every drop. He woke before dawn and worked until after dark, fighting to make the water go where he needed it to go. He barely ate. He barely spoke to his family. All his energy went into the battle with the water. But the water did not obey. It flowed where it wanted to flow. His deeper channels cracked and leaked in the dry earth. The ground was not meant to hold such deep cuts, and it rebelled against his forcing. His walls crumbled because he had built them in haste, without proper foundation. The harder he fought, the less he accomplished. It was as if the water and the earth had joined forces against him. Exhaustion set in. His body ached in ways it had never ached before. His mind spun with worry and frustration, running through the same desperate calculations over and over. He grew short-tempered with his wife and children, snapping at them for small things, unable to explain the fear that drove his anger. Sleep would not come, and when it did, he dreamed of empty fields and hungry faces looking to him for help he could not provide. One evening, too tired to work anymore, but too agitated to rest, Noboru walked to the edge of his property where an old neighbor named Senzo had his own small plot. Senzo was even older than Noboru's father had been when he died. He had farmed this difficult land for over 60 years. To Noboru's surprise, Senzo's fields looked better than his own. Not lush, not abundant, but alive. The crops were smaller than usual, but they were surviving. There was water in Senzo's channels, enough to keep his plants from dying. How? Noboru asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and something like desperation. How do your fields have water when mine are drying up? I have worked twice as hard as any year before. I have done everything I can think of. And still my crops die while yours live. Senzo was sitting on a wooden bench outside his small house, watching the evening light fade over the mountains. He gestured for Noboru to sit beside him. You are trying to force the water to do what you want. But water does not respond to force. It responds to invitation. Noboru did not understand. I am just trying to bring water to my fields. The same thing you are doing. Senzo shook his head slowly. Not the same thing. Come. I will show you. Despite his exhaustion, Noboru followed the old man to his fields. The light was fading, but he could still see the channels that carried water to Senzo's crops. They were different from his own. His channels were deep and straight, cut with hard labor into the resistant earth. Senzo's channels were shallow and curved. They followed the natural contours of the land, bending where the ground wanted them to bend, sloping where the earth already sloped. You dig deep channels because you think deeper will hold more water, Senzo explained. But deep channels fight the earth. They crack. They leak. And they ask the water to go where it does not want to go. I dig shallow channels that follow where the water already wants to flow. Less work for me. Less resistance from the earth. And the water comes willingly because I am not forcing it. He pointed to a place where his channel curved around a slight rise in the ground. You would have dug straight through that hill. Much work. And the water would have resisted every step. I simply went around. The water flows easily. It does not mind the longer path. Noboru looked at his own fields in the gathering darkness. He had fought the land all his life. He had seen farming as a battle against nature, a struggle to impose his will on reluctant earth and water. It had never occurred to him that there might be another way. But how do you know where the water wants to go? He asked. Senzo smiled. I watch. I pay attention. The land tells you if you listen. After a rain, see where puddles form. See where the ground is wet longest. Those are the paths the water is already taking. Work with those paths instead of against them. You will work less and accomplish more. Over the following days, despite his skepticism, Noboru tried what Senzo had suggested. He stopped digging new channels and started watching his land. At first, it felt like doing nothing, like giving up. His whole life he had believed that hard work was the answer to every problem. That effort and struggle were what separated success from failure. Sitting and watching felt like laziness, but he made himself do it. He walked his fields slowly, paying attention to things he had never noticed before. The slight depression where water gathered after even a light rain. The angle of the slope that determined which direction water naturally moved. The places where the earth was softer and absorbed water more easily. The spots where the soil was hard and water simply ran off. He began to see his land differently. Before, It had been an obstacle to be overcome, a resistant force that required constant battle. Now he began to see it as something that had its own nature, its own preferences, its own way of wanting to work. The land was not his enemy. It was simply itself. And if he could understand what it was, he could work with it instead of against it. He began to reshape his channels, not according to his idea of where water should go, but according to where water seemed to want to go. It was humbling work. He had to abandon channels he had spent years digging. He had to admit that his father's way and his father's father's way might not have been the best way. This was harder than the physical labor. It meant accepting that all his struggle might have been misdirected, that he had been fighting a battle that did not need to be fought. But the water responded. As he stopped fighting and started cooperating, more water reached his fields. Not because there was more water available, but because less of it was lost to resistance and leakage. By working with the natural flow instead of against it, he accomplished what all his forcing had not been able to achieve. His crops survived that dry year. They were not abundant, but they were enough. His family did not go hungry. When he looked at his fields at harvest time, he felt something he had not expected. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of wonder. He had accomplished more by yielding than by all his years of fighting. More important than the harvest was what Noboru learned. He had discovered that fighting was not always the answer, that sometimes the way to get what you need is not to push harder, but to push less, to watch, to listen, to find the way that opens naturally instead of trying to force open a way that is closed. He thought about how he had lived his whole life, always struggling, always fighting, against the land, against circumstances, against anything that did not go the way he wanted. He had believed this was strength. He had believed this was what it meant to be a good farmer, a good provider, a good man. Now he saw that all that fighting had often worked against him, that the very effort he thought was helping had sometimes been the thing holding him back. In the years that followed, Noboru became known in the valley for his water management. Other farmers came to learn from him, especially in dry years. He would walk their land with them and point out what the earth was telling them, where water wanted to flow, where it was being forced against its nature, how to work with conditions rather than against them. Water is a teacher, he would tell them. It shows us that the soft overcomes the hard. That yielding can be stronger than forcing. We think we must fight to survive. But sometimes the fighting is exactly what prevents us from getting what we need. This story shows us another aspect of water mind. Noboru's struggle against the water and the land only made his situation worse. When he learned to observe, to yield, to work with natural conditions rather than against them, he found success that all his effort had not achieved. The Buddha taught about right effort. Not too much, not too little. Not forcing, not passive. There is a middle way that accomplishes more through alignment than through struggle. Water shows us this middle way. It has clear direction and purpose, yet it achieves that purpose through flexibility rather than force. In our own lives, we often find ourselves fighting circumstances we cannot change, fighting feelings we wish we did not have, fighting the natural flow of things because we believe they should be different. This fighting exhausts us and often makes things worse. But when we can soften, when we can look for the way that opens rather than trying to force open the way that is closed, we discover a different kind of strength. No, mind moves like water. It does not struggle with each moment, trying to make it different than it is. It responds to what is actually present, finding the natural path, yielding where yielding is wise, persisting where persistence will serve. This is not passivity. It is intelligence. The intelligence of water that finds its way to the sea without ever consulting a map. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself settling, like water finding its level. There is nowhere you need to push toward, nothing you need to fight. Just this breath flowing in, this breath flowing out. Like water, like the natural movement of life itself. In Zen, there is great attention given to the space between thoughts. We usually notice only the thoughts themselves. They arise, they capture our attention, they lead to other thoughts, and we follow along like someone pulled by a current. But between one thought and the next, there is a gap, a pause, a moment of stillness that we usually pass through without noticing. The Buddha pointed toward this gap when he taught about the nature of mind. He showed that thoughts are not continuous, even though they seem to be. They arise and pass away, like waves on the ocean. Between each wave, the ocean is still there. Between each thought, awareness is still there. This awareness that exists before and between thoughts is not empty or dull. It is alert, vivid, present. It is the ground from which thoughts spring and to which they return. Zen practice often involves becoming familiar with this gap, not trying to make it larger or hold on to it, but simply noticing that it exists. When we meditate, when we sit quietly and watch the mind, we begin to notice these pauses. A thought ends. For a moment, there is just awareness, just presence, before the next thought begins. This moment is always available to us, though we rarely notice it because we are so focused on the thoughts themselves. This teaching points to something important about no mind. No mind is not something we create or achieve. It is what is already here before thinking starts. It is the stillness that exists prior to mental activity. When we rest in this stillness, even briefly, we discover a kind of peace that does not depend on our thoughts being a certain way. The thoughts can come and go. The stillness remains. Buddhist masters have compared this to the sky and clouds. Thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky. Sometimes there are many clouds, sometimes few. Sometimes they are dark and heavy, sometimes light and wispy. But the sky itself is unchanged. It does not become the clouds. It simply holds them as they pass. The awareness that exists before thought is like this sky. Vast, open, undisturbed by whatever moves through it. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. In a village known for its festivals, there lived a drum maker named Ryo. His family had crafted drums for generations. The great drums that called villagers to celebrations. The small drums that kept rhythm for dancers. the sacred drums that were played only at temples during ceremonies. Rio knew how to stretch the skins, how to shape the wooden bodies, how to create instruments that would resonate with deep, full voices. But making a drum was only half the craft. The other half was testing it. Each drum that left Rio's workshop had to be played, had to be listened to, had to be judged worthy or unworthy. This testing was an art in itself, one that Rio had learned from his father, who had learned from his father before him. When Rio was young, his father had taught him the basic technique. Strike the drum in the center for the deepest tone. Strike near the edge for a higher, sharper sound. Listen for resonance, for sustain, for any buzz or rattle that might indicate a flaw. These were things that could be taught in words, demonstrated, practiced. But there was something else his father had tried to teach him, something more difficult to convey. Rio remembered his father sitting before a newly completed drum, stick raised, eyes half closed, waiting. Sometimes he would wait for many long breaths before striking. The workshop would fall completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to quiet themselves. As a child, Rio had grown impatient watching this. Why not just hit the drum and see how it sounded? What was all this waiting for? His father's stillness had seemed almost sacred. He sat like a statue, the stick poised in the air, his breathing slow and deep. Young Rio would fidget and shift, wanting the waiting to end, wanting the sound to come. But his father never rushed. He waited until something told him the moment was right, though Rio could never see what that something was. "What are you waiting for?" he had asked once, unable to contain his impatience. His father had smiled, that gentle, patient smile that Rio would remember all his life. "I am listening to the drum before I play it." "But it is not making any sound." "Everything makes a sound," his father replied. "Even silence has a sound if you listen deeply enough. The drum is already singing. I am waiting until I can hear it. Then I will know how to strike it. Then the drum will tell me its true voice." Rio had not understood. He thought his father was speaking poetically, the way old craftsmen sometimes did, making simple things sound mysterious. He learned the practical skills of drum making and considered himself fully trained. After his father passed away, Rio took over the workshop and continued the family craft. His drums were good. Customers were satisfied. The instruments sold well and were played at festivals throughout the region. By any measure, Rio was a successful drum maker. But something nagged at him. When he tested his drums, he would strike them and listen, strike and listen, adjusting and refining. The process worked well enough. Yet he remembered how his father had tested drums, that long stillness before the first strike, and he wondered if he was missing something. One autumn, an old drummer came to Rio's workshop to purchase a new instrument. His name was Master Seiji, and he had been playing drums at the great temple in the capital for over 50 years. His reputation was such that Rio felt honored and nervous to have him as a customer. Rio showed him several drums he had recently completed. Master Seiji examined each one carefully, running his aged hands over the stretched skins, feeling the wooden bodies, looking at the craftsmanship with an expert eye. "These are well made," he said. "Your technique is sound. Your materials are good. May I hear them?" Rio handed him a drumstick, and stepped back. Master Seiji sat before the first drum. He raised the stick, and then he waited. The silence stretched on. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 5 breaths, 10. Ryo began to feel uncomfortable. Was something wrong? Was the old man having some kind of difficulty? Master Seiji's eyes were half closed. His body was utterly still. The stick remained raised, motionless. The only movement was his breathing, slow and deep. Then, without any visible preparation, without any gathering of force, the stick descended. The drum spoke. A single deep tone that seemed to fill not just the workshop, but something larger. The note hung in the air, rich and full, then slowly faded into silence. Master Seiji opened his eyes. "This is a good drum," he said simply. He moved to the next drum and repeated the process. The long stillness, the waiting, then the effortless strike and the revealing tone. Each drum was tested this way, the silence before each strike lasting as long as the silence after. When he had finished, Master Seiji chose 2 drums to purchase. As Ryo wrapped them carefully, he could not contain his curiosity. "Master, may I ask you something? When you test a drum, you wait a long time before striking. My father used to do the same thing. He said he was listening to the drum before playing it. I never understood what he meant." Master Seiji smiled, and in that smile, Ryo saw an echo of his own father's patient expression. "Your father was a wise man. What he said was true. The drum is already singing before we strike it. But to hear that song, we must become very quiet. Our minds are usually so full of noise that we cannot hear the subtle sounds. We are thinking about how we will strike, what tone we expect to hear, whether the drum is good or not. All this thinking creates a kind of deafness." He touched the head of one of the drums gently. "When I sit before a drum, I first let my mind become still. I am not thinking about the drum. I am not anticipating the sound. I am simply present, listening to what is already here. In that stillness, before any thought arises, there is a kind of awareness that is very clear, very sensitive. From that stillness, I can hear things that thinking cannot hear." "What do you hear?" Ryo asked. "The drum itself. Its nature. Its voice that wants to emerge. When I strike from that stillness, I am not imposing my idea of how the drum should sound. I am inviting the drum to speak. The quality of my attention before the strike shapes the quality of the sound. If I strike from scattered thinking, the tone is scattered. If I strike from stillness, the tone is clear." Ryo thought about this for a long moment. "Is this why you wait so long before each strike? You are finding that stillness?" "Yes. Though with practice, the stillness can come more quickly. It is not about the time. It is about the quality of attention. Some days the mind quiets easily. Other days it takes longer. I wait until I feel that clarity, that presence before thought. Then I strike." After Master Seiji left with his drums, Ryo sat alone in his workshop. A finished drum stood before him on its stand. He had tested this drum already, the quick, practical way he had developed over the years. It was a good drum. He knew its sound. But now he wanted to try something different. He raised the stick and prepared to strike. Then he caught himself. His mind was already full of anticipation, full of what he expected to hear, full of thoughts about whether he could do what Master Seiji had described. He lowered the stick and closed his eyes. He tried to let his mind become still. Thoughts kept coming. Doubts, questions, memories of his father, judgments about himself. The mind seemed determined to fill every moment with noise. Ryo did not fight. He had learned that lesson from his own drum making. You cannot force a skin to stretch properly. You have to work with it gently, patiently. Perhaps the mind was the same. He sat and breathed. Thoughts came and he let them pass. Slowly, gradually, the intervals between thoughts grew longer. He began to notice the gaps, the pauses, the moments of simple presence before the next thought arose. And in one of those gaps, he heard something. Not with his ears exactly. It was subtler than that. A sense of the drum before him. A feeling of its presence, its waiting, its readiness to speak. Without deciding to, without thinking about it, his arm moved. The stick struck. The tone that emerged was different from what he had heard before when testing this drum. Fuller, rounder, more alive. As if the drum had finally been given permission to truly sing. Ryo opened his eyes and stared at the drum in wonder. It was the same instrument he had tested dozens of times. But the sound had been different. The difference had come from him, from the stillness before the strike, from listening before hearing, from presence before thought. He tried again. This time the stillness came more easily. The gap between thoughts opened, and in that gap he found the same clear presence. The strike that followed produced another beautiful tone. Not identical to the first, each strike was unique, but carrying the same quality of aliveness. Ryo laughed softly to himself in the empty workshop. All these years he had thought he understood his craft. He had thought his father's mysterious waiting was just an old man's habit, a quirk to be respected but not understood. Now he saw that his father had been trying to show him the most important thing of all. Not just how to make drums, but how to meet them. How to be present before acting. How to let stillness give birth to sound. In the years that followed, Ryo's drums became known for a quality that was difficult to name. People said they sang more freely than other drums, that they seemed to have voices of their own. Some credited his craftsmanship, which was indeed excellent. But Ryo knew the real secret was simpler and stranger. He had learned to hear the drum before playing it. He had learned to rest in the stillness before thought. And from that stillness, something could happen that his thinking mind could never have created. When people asked him the secret of his craft, he found it difficult to explain. "I wait," he would say. "I listen to what is already there. The drum tells me when it is ready." Most people did not understand. They thought he was being humble or evasive. But Ryo knew it was the simple truth. The quality that made his drums special did not come from him. It came through him from a place that existed before thinking, a stillness that had been there all along, waiting for him to discover it. This story shows us something subtle about the space before thought arises. Rio discovered that the quality of attention he brought to the moment before action shaped the action itself. When he struck from scattered thinking, the results were ordinary. When he struck from stillness, something different emerged. Zen teaches that this stillness is always available to us. It is not something we create. It is what is already here when we stop adding the noise of thinking. In that stillness, there is a kind of knowing that is more direct than thought. A responsiveness that does not need to deliberate. This is the heart of no mind. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a city known for its tea houses, there lived a tea master named Kinu, whose reputation had spread throughout the region. People came from distant provinces to attend her tea ceremonies. They said there was something different about the way she moved. Something that made the simple act of preparing tea into a profound experience. Kinu had not always been remarkable. As a young woman, she had studied the tea ceremony like many others. She had learned the proper positions, the correct sequences, the traditional forms. Her technique was precise and accurate. But so was the technique of many tea practitioners. She was skilled, but not exceptional. The change had come after a great loss. Her teacher, an old woman who had guided her for 20 years, had died suddenly. One day she was there, sharp-eyed and warm, adjusting Kinu's posture, commenting on the angle of the tea scoop. The next day, she was gone. A stroke in the night, they said. She had not suffered. She had simply stopped. Kino had been devastated. Her teacher had been more than an instructor. She had been a second mother, a guide, a constant presence for half of Kinu's life. The grief was overwhelming. For months, Kinu could not practice. The tea room reminded her too painfully of her teacher's presence. She could still see the old woman kneeling there, still hear her voice explaining the meaning behind each movement. The familiar forms felt hollow without the one who had taught them to her. During this time of grief, Kinu spent many hours sitting in silence, not practicing, not thinking about tea, just sitting with her sorrow, letting it move through her like weather moving through a valley. She had no energy for anything else, no desire to accomplish or improve, or even to feel better. She simply sat and breathed and let the grief be what it was. Something happened during those months of stillness. Kinu did not notice it at first. Her mind, exhausted from sorrow, began to quiet in ways it never had during all her years of dedicated practice. Without trying to meditate, without following any technique, she fell into long stretches of simple presence. Thoughts came less frequently. When they came, they passed more quickly. The silence between them grew deeper. One morning, without planning to, she found herself in the tea room. She did not decide to make tea. Her hands simply began to move. They knew the form so well that they did not need her guidance. She watched as if from a distance while her body performed the ceremony. Something was different. The movements flowed in a way they never had before. There was no hesitation, no adjustment, no thought about what came next. Her body simply moved from stillness into action, from action back into stillness, like breathing. When she finished, Kinu sat in the quiet room and tried to understand what had happened. Her mind had been empty. Empty of planning, empty of trying, empty of self-watching. There had been just the movement, arising from somewhere before thought. She began to explore this discovery. She found that when she sat quietly before beginning a ceremony, letting her mind settle into stillness, the movements that followed had a different quality. They seemed to arise by themselves, without her having to direct them. The tea was prepared, the guests were served, everything happened correctly, but there was no sense of her doing it. There was just the doing. Students began to notice the change in her practice. They could not say exactly what was different. The forms were the same. The sequence was the same. But something had shifted. When they watched Kinu prepare tea, they felt they were witnessing something natural and inevitable, like water flowing downhill or flowers opening in sunlight. One student, a young woman named Michi, asked Kinu directly, "Your movements seem to have no beginning. They simply happen. How is this possible? When I perform the ceremony, I am always thinking about what comes next. My movements feel separate, like beads on a string. Yours flow like a single continuous stream. What is your secret?" Kinu considered the question carefully. It was difficult to put into words what she had discovered. "When I first sit down to prepare tea," she said, "I do nothing. I sit with an empty mind and let the stillness deepen. I am not thinking about the ceremony. I am not planning my first movement. I am just present, aware, resting in the silence before anything begins." She paused, searching for the right words. In that stillness, there is a kind of readiness. Like a pool of water, perfectly calm, waiting for a single drop to create ripples. When the readiness is complete, movement begins by itself. I do not decide to move. The movement simply arises from the stillness, the way a breath arises when we stop holding our lungs. Michi looked puzzled. "But how can you move without deciding to move?" "The decision happens, but it happens beneath thought. Our bodies know how to do many things without our minds directing each movement. When you walk, do you decide to lift each foot? When you speak, do you plan the position of your tongue for each sound? There is an intelligence that operates before and beneath our thinking. When I sit in stillness before the ceremony, I am allowing that deeper intelligence to guide the movements. My thinking mind steps aside and something else takes over." She lifted the tea bowl and held it gently in her palms. "The ceremony has been practiced for centuries. Its forms live in my body, in my hands, in my bones. They do not need my thoughts to tell them what to do. When I rest in stillness, the ceremony can perform itself through me. I am not the one doing it. I am simply present while it happens." Michi began to practice this way. At first, it was frustrating. When she tried to empty her mind before performing the ceremony, her thoughts only became louder. They seemed to multiply, as if offended by her attempt to quiet them. She thought about whether she was sitting correctly. She wondered if she would ever understand what Kinu meant. She judged herself for having so many thoughts. She felt she was doing it wrong, that she could not find the stillness Kinu described. She wanted to give up. This was too hard. Perhaps some people were naturally suited for this kind of practice and others were not. Perhaps she simply had too busy a mind. But Kinu counseled patience. Do not try to empty your mind. That just creates more struggle. You are adding another thought, the thought that you should have no thoughts. This is like trying to smooth water by pressing on it. Simply sit. Let thoughts come and go. Do not chase them and do not push them away. They are just clouds passing. You are the sky. Over time, the mind settles on its own. You cannot force a pond to become still. You simply stop stirring it and wait. Weeks passed. Michi practiced sitting in stillness before each ceremony. At first, it felt like nothing was changing. But gradually, so gradually, she almost did not notice, something shifted. She began to notice the gaps between her thoughts. Brief moments of simple presence before the next thought arose. These gaps had always been there, but she had never paid attention to them. Now she learned to rest in these gaps, not grasping at them, but simply allowing them. One day, during a practice ceremony, something shifted. Michi had been sitting in stillness, and when the time came to begin, she did not decide to move. Her hands simply began. The movements flowed from somewhere she could not name. For the first time, she understood what Kinu had been describing. The ceremony that followed was not perfect. There were moments when her thinking mind tried to take over, when she lost the flow and had to find it again. But she had tasted something new. She had experienced movement arising from stillness, action born from the space before thought. After the ceremony, Michi sat quietly, absorbing what had happened. Kinu smiled at her. You found it. Only for moments. It kept slipping away. That is how it begins. Moments of flow, then the mind takes over, then we settle again and flow returns. With practice, the moments grow longer. But even masters lose the flow sometimes. The practice is not about achieving permanent stillness. It is about returning to it again and again, resting in the silence before thought, and allowing action to arise from that source. Zen teaches that this space before thought is not empty. It is full of a different kind of presence. An awareness that does not need thoughts to be complete. When we learn to rest in this awareness, even briefly, we discover that action can arise without the usual mental machinery of planning and deciding. Movement flows from stillness. Response arises spontaneously. This is no mind in motion. The Buddha taught that we suffer because we cling to thoughts, to identities, to our constant mental commentary about experience. But before the commentary begins, there is just experience itself. Pure awareness meeting the present moment. When we touch this directly, even for an instant, something relaxes. We discover that we do not need to think our way through every moment. Life can live itself through us when we step out of the way. Take a gentle breath now. Notice the small pause at the end of the exhale before the next inhale begins. That tiny gap of stillness. Rest there for a moment. There is nothing you need to figure out. Nothing you need to do. Just this stillness, from which the next breath will naturally arise. We have traveled together through many aspects of no mind tonight. We have seen how the tired mind finds rest when it stops fighting itself. We have felt the wisdom that lives in the body, beneath thought. We have witnessed what happens when we forget ourselves and allow action to flow freely. We have learned from water how to yield rather than force. We have touched the stillness that exists before thought begins. Now, we come to the heart of this teaching. And the heart is very simple. No mind is not a distant achievement. It is not a state reserved for monks who meditate for decades in mountain caves. It is not something you must struggle to attain or feel inadequate for not possessing. No mind is simply what remains when we stop dividing ourselves. It is the natural peace of being whole. Zen teaches that we already have what we are seeking. The Buddha nature, the awakened mind, is not something we must create or earn. It is already here, already present, already who we are. Our thinking covers it over. Our striving pushes it away. Our belief that we need to become something different prevents us from recognizing what we have always been. The teaching of no mind points us back home, not to some special place, but to this moment, exactly as it is. Not to some special state of consciousness, but to the simple awareness that is reading these words, that is breathing this breath, that is resting here right now. When we stop trying to be somewhere else, we discover we are already here. When we stop trying to be someone else, we discover we are already ourselves. When we stop adding the noise of thinking to the silence of being, we find a peace that was waiting for us all along. Buddhist masters sometimes speak of the ordinary mind as the way itself. Not the mind that has been specially trained or purified or elevated. Not the mind that has achieved rare states of consciousness or accumulated extraordinary experiences. Just this mind. The mind that notices the light changing as evening comes. The mind that feels the weight of the blanket. The mind that hears distant sounds and lets them pass. The mind that is aware of being aware without needing to make anything special of that awareness. This ordinary awareness, when we stop complicating it with our seeking and striving, is itself the peace we have been looking for. We have been searching far and wide for something that has never left us. We have been trying to become what we already are. The journey home is not a journey of distance, but a journey of recognition, of seeing what was here all along. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. In a quiet town where the streets were lit each evening by oil lamps, there lived an old lamplighter named Cho. Every day, as the sun began to set, he would take his long pole with its small flame and walk his rounds through the town. One by one, he would reach up and light the lamps that hung at each corner, each crossroads, each stretch of dark street. He had done this work for 40 years. As a young man, he had inherited the job from his father, who had lit these same streets for 30 years before him. In those days, it had seemed like a humble position, almost an embarrassment. Other young men became merchants who traveled to distant cities. They became craftsmen whose work was displayed and admired. They became scholars who were respected for their learning. Cho lit lamps. There was no prestige in it, no wealth to be gained, no advancement possible. Just the simple task of bringing light to darkness, repeated every evening for a lifetime. His father had tried to teach him something about the work, something beyond the mere mechanics of flame and oil. But Cho had been too young, too restless, too hungry for something more impressive than lamplighting. He had not listened carefully. He had assumed his father was just making peace with a small life, finding meaning where there was none. When he was young, Cho had sometimes felt bitter. He would light the lamps while his mind wandered to other places, other lives he might have lived. He thought about what else he might have become if circumstances had been different. He worried about money, about respect, about whether anyone noticed his existence. He planned escapes that never materialized. He dreamed of recognition that never came. His body walked the familiar streets while his mind lived elsewhere, always elsewhere. But somewhere along the way, without any dramatic moment of transformation, something had changed. Cho did not know exactly when it happened. There was no single evening he could point to and say, "That was when I woke up." The shift had been gradual, like the slow turning of seasons. He had simply started paying attention. At first, it was just noticing the small things. The way the flame on his pole flickered in the breeze. The particular quality of light as the sun went down, different each evening depending on clouds and season. The sounds of the town settling into night. Doors closing. Voices calling children home. The smell of cooking fires and evening meals. Then the attention deepened. He began to notice the act of lighting itself. The moment when his flame touched the lamp's wick. The small catch, the hesitation, then the bloom of light. Each lamp was slightly different. Some caught quickly. Some needed patience. Some burned bright and some burned gentle. He came to know each lamp on his route the way a gardener knows each plant. And then something else happened, something harder to describe. The separation between Cho and his work began to dissolve. He no longer felt like a person performing a task. There was just the walking, just the reaching up, just the lighting, just the light spreading through the darkness, one lamp at a time. His mind grew quiet during these evening rounds. Not empty, not blank, but quiet. Thoughts would arise sometimes, but they did not pull him away the way they once had. He noticed them the way he noticed birds flying overhead. Present, and then gone. His attention stayed with the work, with the walking, with the lights blooming one after another. People in the town began to notice something about Cho. They could not say exactly what it was. He had always been kind. He had always done his job well. But now there was something different in his presence. A stillness. A peace that seemed to radiate from him like warmth from a fire. Children would follow him sometimes on his evening rounds, watching him light the lamps. He never shooed them away. He would smile at them and continue his work, letting them be part of the quiet ritual. They seemed to sense something special in it, though they could not have said what. One evening, a visitor to the town, a scholar who had studied at the great monasteries, happened to be walking when Cho passed by on his rounds. The scholar stopped and watched the old lamplighter work. Something in the quality of Cho's movements caught his attention. The unhurried pace, the complete absorption, the absence of any restlessness or distraction. After Cho had lit several lamps, the scholar approached him, "Excuse me," he said. "I have spent many years studying meditation and seeking peace of mind. I have sat in silence for months at a time. I have received teachings from renowned masters. But watching you just now, I felt something I rarely feel. A quality of presence that all my practice has not given me. May I ask what your secret is?" Cho looked at the scholar with gentle, puzzled eyes. "I have no secret," he said. "I just light lamps. But there is something in the way you do it. A stillness, a completeness, as if you are entirely here, not wishing to be anywhere else, not thinking about anything else. I have sought this state through many techniques. How did you find it?" Cho considered the question carefully. He was not used to speaking about such things. He was a lamplighter, not a teacher. "I do not know if I can explain," he said slowly. "When I was young, my mind was always somewhere else. I would light lamps while thinking about other things. The work was just something my body did while my mind wandered. I was divided. Part of me here, part of me elsewhere." He reached up and lit another lamp. The flame caught and spread its warm glow. But over many years, something changed. I stopped wanting to be somewhere else. I stopped thinking the lighting was just a task to get through so I could do other things. I let myself be here, just here, with the flame, with the lamp, with the walking, with the evening coming on. He turned to look at the scholar directly. "I am not thinking about lighting lamps. I am not thinking about anything. There is just this. The flame, the wick, the darkness becoming light. Where else would my mind be? This is my life. This moment, walking this street, lighting this lamp. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" The scholar was silent for a long moment. He had received many complex teachings about emptiness and no-self and the nature of mind. He had practiced many sophisticated techniques. He had debated with other scholars about the fine points of different schools of Buddhism. He had accumulated knowledge and experiences that he thought would lead him to peace. But this old lamplighter, with no training and no philosophy, had shown him something simpler, something his studying had obscured rather than revealed. All his seeking had been looking in the wrong direction. He had been looking for something special, something extraordinary, something beyond ordinary experience. But this old man had found peace not by transcending ordinary life, but by being fully present for it. "You are not divided," the scholar said finally. "You are whole. That is what I was seeing. Not a special state of consciousness. Not some rare achievement. Just a man who is fully where he is, doing what he is doing, without being pulled elsewhere by his thoughts." Cho nodded, though he was not sure he understood everything the scholar said. "I just light lamps," he repeated. "But yes, I am here while I do it. Where else would I be?" The scholar bowed deeply, as he would bow to a great teacher. And in that moment, he understood that teachers can appear in any form. That wisdom does not announce itself with robes and titles. That sometimes an old man with a lamp pole knows more about peace than all the scholars in all the monasteries. The scholar thanked him and watched as Cho continued on his rounds, moving from lamp to lamp through the deepening twilight. Each light bloomed in turn. The darkness softened. The town prepared for sleep. And the old man walked on at peace, undivided, simply doing what was before him to do. Simply being where he was. Simply home. This story shows us the simplicity at the heart of no mind. Cho had no special training. He did not sit in meditation or receive teachings from masters. He simply, over the course of many years, stopped being divided. He stopped wanting to be somewhere other than where he was. He let himself be fully present for his simple work. And in that wholeness, he found a peace that even a scholar's years of seeking had not produced. Zen teaches that awakening is not complicated. We make it complicated with our seeking and striving, our techniques and philosophies. But at its heart, it is simply this: being here, fully, without division. Doing what we are doing, completely, without wishing we were doing something else. Meeting this moment as it is, without needing it to be different. This does not mean we never think or plan or remember. Thinking has its place, but we do not need to think constantly. We do not need to be elsewhere in our minds while our bodies go through the motions of living. We can come back to where we actually are. We can be whole. Let us explore one more story as we come to rest together. In a monastery tucked into a fold of the mountains, there lived a gardener named Sen who had tended the temple grounds for over 30 years. She had come to the monastery as a young woman, restless and searching. She had wanted to find enlightenment, to break through to some great understanding, to become wise and free. In those early years, she had sat in meditation with fierce determination. She had studied the teachings with intense concentration, memorizing sutras and commentaries, questioning teachers about the finest points of doctrine. She had sought out the most respected masters and begged for their guidance. She undertook difficult practices. She fasted. She kept silence for months at a time. Enlightenment, she believed, was something to be achieved through effort and dedication, and no one could say she lacked either. But enlightenment did not come. No matter how hard she tried, how many hours she sat, how many teachings she absorbed, the breakthrough she sought remained out of reach. She had experiences during meditation, glimpses of something that felt significant, but they always faded. She would think she was close, that the next retreat or the next practice or the next teaching would finally push her over the edge into lasting awakening. But it never happened. She saw other practitioners around her, some of whom seemed to have found what she was looking for. They had a quality of ease she could not access, a settledness that her striving never produced. She wondered what was wrong with her. Was she not sincere enough? Not dedicated enough? Not intelligent enough? Why could she not grasp what others seemed to have attained? After many years of striving, Sen grew exhausted. Her seeking had worn her out. The intensity she had maintained for so long could not be sustained. Her body ached from all the sitting. Her mind felt dull from all the effort. She had given everything to her search and had nothing to show for it but fatigue. She asked the abbess if she could be released from the meditation schedule and given simple work instead. She expected the abbess to refuse, to tell her to try harder to push through the exhaustion. But the abbess simply looked at her for a long moment and then nodded. "Go tend the gardens," she said. "Perhaps what you are seeking will find you there." Sen was assigned to tend the temple grounds, and at first she felt like a failure. She had come seeking enlightenment and ended up pulling weeds. She had hoped to become wise and found herself hauling water and trimming bushes. It seemed like a defeat. But slowly, as the seasons passed and she gave herself to the simple work, something unexpected happened. She stopped thinking about enlightenment. There was no room for grand spiritual seeking when you were on your knees in the dirt, pulling weeds one by one. There was no space for philosophy when you were carrying water to thirsty plants or raking leaves from the pathways. The body was too engaged, the attention too occupied, for the mind to wander into its usual territories of ambition and self-judgment. Her world became small and immediate. This plant, this stone, this patch of earth. The feeling of soil between her fingers, cool and alive. The smell of green growing things after rain. The way light fell differently through the leaves as the seasons turned. The small satisfactions of seeing a plant she had tended begin to bloom. The simple rhythm of work and rest, effort and ease. At first, she resisted this smallness. She told herself she was just recovering, just resting before returning to her real practice. But the weeks turned to months, the months to years, and she found herself less and less interested in returning to the meditation hall. The garden had become her practice. The simple acts of tending had become her path. And in that smallness, that immediacy, Sen began to find what all her seeking had not given her. Not enlightenment as she had imagined it. Not some dramatic breakthrough or mystical experience. Just a quiet settling. A peace that came from being fully present with simple things. She no longer thought about whether she was making spiritual progress. She no longer compared herself to others or judged her own development. She simply worked in the garden, hands in the soil, sun on her back, water flowing to roots that needed it. Young monks sometimes came to watch her work. They noticed something about the way she moved. Something unhurried. Something complete. They would ask her questions about practice, expecting complicated answers. "How do you find peace?" They would ask. "I pull weeds," she would say. "I water plants. My hands are in the soil. Where else would my mind be?" "But don't you seek enlightenment anymore?" Sen would smile at this question. "I sought enlightenment for 20 years and could not find it. Then I stopped seeking and found something better. I found this." She would gesture at the garden around her. "This moment, this breath, this work. When I stopped looking for something special somewhere else, I discovered that ordinary life was enough. That being fully here was what I had been looking for all along." One autumn day, the abbess came to walk with Sen through the garden. The leaves were turning gold and red. The air was cool and smelled of ripening fruit. "I have watched you over the years," the abbess said. "When you first came here, you were like a clenched fist, gripping so tightly to your seeking. Now you are like an open hand. What changed?" Sen considered the question as they walked together past the old plum trees. "I gave up," she said, finally. I stopped trying to get somewhere. I stopped believing that peace was something I had to achieve through effort. I just started doing what was in front of me to do. And somehow, in that giving up, I found what all my trying had never given me. She paused to pull a small weed that had appeared beside the path. I think I was always looking somewhere else. Looking for enlightenment in special experiences, in breakthrough moments, in states of consciousness I had read about in books written by ancient masters. I never thought to look here, in the garden, in my hands, in the ordinary moments that make up most of life. She straightened slowly, her old knees protesting the movement, and looked around at the garden she had tended for so many years. The trees she had planted as saplings were now tall and strong. The stones she had placed lined the pathways in patterns that felt inevitable, as if they had always been there. When I finally stopped looking elsewhere, I found that here was enough. That ordinary was enough. That this moment, just as it is, was what I had been seeking all along. Not some other moment. Not some transformed moment. This one. The only one that actually exists. The abbess nodded slowly. This is what the old teachers meant when they said the ordinary mind is the way. Not a special mind. Not a perfected mind. Just this mind, fully present, not seeking elsewhere. You have found it, though you were not trying to find it. Perhaps because you were not trying to find it. Yes, Sen agreed. And that seems to be the secret, if there is one. Stop trying to find it. Stop believing it is somewhere else. Just be here, doing what you are doing, fully and completely. What we seek is not hidden in some distant place. It is here. It has always been here. We just had to stop running past it. They walked on together through the garden as the afternoon light began to soften. Somewhere a bird called. Leaves drifted down from the trees. And Sen, who had once sought enlightenment with such fierce determination, was at peace. Not because she had achieved anything special, but because she had finally stopped trying to achieve and simply allowed herself to be where she was. Zen teaches that what we seek is not far away. It is not hidden in secret teachings or available only to those with special talents. It is here, in this breath, in this moment, in the ordinary experience of being alive. When we stop dividing ourselves between here and there, between who we are and who we think we should become, we find a wholeness that was never really lost. No, mind is not something exotic. It is the simple experience of being undivided, of doing what we are doing without wishing we were doing something else, of being where we are without longing to be somewhere else, of resting in this moment without needing it to be different. The lamplighter found it through 40 years of walking his rounds. The gardener found it by giving up her search and kneeling in the dirt. Both discovered the same truth. Peace is not achieved. It is allowed. It is what remains when we stop complicating our lives with endless seeking and striving. It is what we find when we finally come home to where we already are. All the teachings we have explored tonight point to this simple truth. The tired mind finds rest not by achieving something, but by allowing itself to be. The body's wisdom emerges not when we direct it, but when we trust it. We forget ourselves not through effort, but through complete engagement. We flow like water, not by forcing, but by yielding. The stillness before thought is not something we create, but something we discover was always there. And now, at the end of our journey together, we arrive at the simplest teaching of all. No, mind is just this: being here, being whole, being at peace with what is. Not because everything is perfect, not because we have achieved some special state, but because we have stopped dividing ourselves. We have stopped seeking elsewhere. We have come home. As you rest here now, you do not need to seek no mind. You do not need to achieve anything or become anyone different. You can simply be where you are, breathing this breath, feeling this body, hearing these words. This ordinary awareness is enough. This simple presence is the peace you have been looking for. Take a gentle breath. Feel yourself settling into this moment, exactly as it is. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. The thinking mind has worked hard for a long time. It can rest now. Let it rest. Let everything rest. You are here. You are whole. You are home. As we come to the end of our time together tonight, let yourself settle even more deeply into rest. We have explored no mind from many angles. We have seen the tired mind find peace when it stops fighting itself. We have felt the wisdom that lives in the body, in the hands that remember what thinking cannot teach. We have witnessed the art of forgetting, where the self that watches and judges dissolves into wholeness. We have learned from water how to flow rather than force. We have touched the stillness that exists before thought begins. And we have come home to the simple truth that what we seek is already here. You do not need to remember all of this. The stories and teachings have done their work. They have settled into you like seeds falling onto quiet earth. In their own time, in their own way, they will grow. For now, there is nothing more to do. The thinking mind has heard what it needed to hear. It can rest now. Let it rest. Let the thoughts come and go like clouds passing through an empty sky. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to push them away. Simply let them be and let yourself be. Your breath continues on its own. Your heart beats without your direction. Life is living itself through you, as it always has. You can trust this. You can rest in this. Sleep will come when it is ready. There is no need to chase it. Simply allow yourself to be here, in this moment, at peace, at rest, whole. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.